So around line, on page 21, around line A to C, we get the third attempt by Euthyphro to define piety. And he says, I think, Socrates, that on this subject no gods would differ from one another, that whoever has killed anyone unjustly should pay the penalty. The second definition was that piety was what is dear to the gods. And the problem with that definition, of course, was that there's many gods. So Euthyphro amends the definition to say, well, all the gods would agree with this. So in other words, unanimous consent among the gods. Socrates then asks, well, even if we did know, that is, if we could figure out what the gods prefer, we still wouldn't really know much about the nature of piety simply because we know what the gods prefer. And he asks a rather odd question at exactly line 10. He says, we shall soon know better whether it is. Consider this. Is the pious being loved by the gods because it is pious, or is it pious because it is being loved by the gods? This sounds confusing, but it's actually quite simple to understand. And while it sounds like he's saying the same thing twice or speaking in circles, he's not. In fact, he means two completely different things. So he says, right, is the pious being loved by the gods because it's pious, and I'm going to say for pious, let's use kind of like a blocked off P. Or the other option is, or is it pious because it is being loved by the gods? So it is pious because it is being loved by gods. Okay, now this again might sound, like he's saying the same thing twice, but actually it's not. Let's analyze the statement. So, if piety is loved by the gods because it is pious, we could ask ourselves which comes first, the love or the piety? Well, in this case, and we know in English, right, if you use the word because, it always means that this is caused by that. No, I'm sorry. I just did that opposite. When I use the because, this is caused by that. So in other words, this has to exist first in order to cause this. So what that means is there is piety, and if there's a pious thing, then the gods love it. And they love it because it is pious. The reason they love it is for its piety. So in other words, what this would mean is first something must be pious, and then when it is pious, the gods recognize it as pious, and then secondly, they love it. So the love comes second, but the existence of the piety comes first, if that kind of makes sense. In this other one, you have something is pious because it's being loved by the gods. So in this case, the love of the gods comes first, and then the love of the gods causes this to be pious. Right? So notice a tremendous difference here. If we're using this one, then only pious things are pious. And it means that the gods must recognize the pious thing, and when they recognize it, they love it. Think of it like this. If you say you love your wife or your girlfriend, your husband, whatever, you have to recognize them. You don't just say that you just love indiscriminately and then that person happens to walk through your love zone and then they become the person they are. No. First you must recognize that person among all the other people and say, that is the person that I love. As opposed to this definition where you say that something is pious because it's loved by the gods. So in this one, anything that the gods love becomes pious. So if the gods love ice cream cones are pious. And the deal is, obviously, this is going to be incredibly arbitrary. And then one could say, well, how could you even discern what the gods love? Well, guys like Euthyphro, who are experts in what the gods like, are the ones who tell us what the gods love. Whereas in this one, it's a very specific definition. Notice it isn't one that's given here, though, is it? I mean, we might say that indeed the gods love things because they're pious, but we still haven't defined pious. So there still is a big question mark here. But what we discover is the gods' love has very little to do with the nature of piety. Whereas here, the gods' love has everything to do with the nature of piety. So now if we can put this into A and B, we could say if we're Euthyphro, one of these is really going to benefit our case. Obviously this one. If we're Euthyphro, since it's sort of arbitrary what the gods would call piety because it's anything that they love, all you have to do is show to people a couple of things that the gods love that sound pious and say, yeah, the gods love that, so it's pious. Whereas if you're going to take A as your understanding, you're still going to have to chase after what pious means and define it. In fact, you'll discover the definition has nothing to do with the gods. So if you want to try to convince people of the rightness of your action, and you're going to use the gods to do so, this is definitely the understanding that you want people to have, because this one puts you in control of deciding what is piety.